All right. Thanks all for joining. Thanks Spencer and Kara for meeting with us this morning to talk about the female athletes. I don't have much more to say, so if Kara and Spencer, if you want to dive right in right away, we can get started.
Sure, sounds good. Well, I'll go ahead and get started first. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint that I have. So actually, we should have checked. Jared, could you just enable the share screen for me quick?
Enable share screen. Do I need to do something there?
Yep, it looks like it was host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I think you just go down by the screen share screen option. I've had this happen before.
Oh.
What? Maybe in the video settings.
Can I make you a host?
You could.
All right, you're the host now. See if you can do something now.
Sounds good. We're good now.
Okay.
All right. Oops. All right. How's that look?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. Move this over. So, we're going to get started on the female athlete triad is what I'm going to focus majority of the next 15 minutes or so on. And a little bit of background on me. I won't go into it too much. If you've caught any of the other sessions that we've done, I've kind of shared a little bit about myself, but I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I own Kara Hair Nutrition. So I have a private practice in the Madison area. I meet with people, not right now, completely virtually, and I provide that one-on-one nutrition coaching for families and individuals. I have a lot of athletes right now. So if that's you, I'm more than happy to touch base with you and get connected and see if I could help you out with your training. And right now I'm also a runner, just doing easy runs right now, not really training for anything. So what we're doing today, course outline, is really straightforward, but what exactly is the female athlete triad, and then signs and symptoms, causes, and then how to prevent and treat that. So really basic, but it's a huge important topic to be going over. And I think it's one that's often overlooked. And it's kind of taboo sometimes to talk about, and so we don't often think about it. If you happen to be a coach or kind of training athletes, this is super important for you just to know and recognize what your athletes are going through too, and be able to pick up on some of these signs and symptoms. So first off, what is it? It's a serious condition that really usually goes unnoticed, like I mentioned, and I think the female athlete triad is a misnomer. I like to call it REDS or Red S syndrome. And that's just because it's not necessarily for females completely. So REDS is relative energy deficiency in sports syndrome. So that's basically what it is. You have an energy deficiency, and that can cause a whole host of other issues to go on. Typically it is in females, we think of it that way, but it can also be for males as well. So if you're a male listening, it's not just for females. You don't have to tune out. This is also for you as well. But females do tend to underestimate our caloric needs. And so maybe we think, oh, we just need 1,500 calories, or we're told like the amount, a range that we need to be in. But really, if you're training for anything and you're an athlete, you probably need more calories than what you think you do. Might be close to 2,000 plus, maybe up to 3,000, depending on how often you're doing your workouts, if you're doing 2 times a day, or how long they are, the intensity. So really keeping that in mind of you might be underestimating your caloric needs. And then also sometimes, and that could just be unintentional, but then there's also the side of we might use that increased training as a way to lose weight. And that's really enticing for females to say, hey, I'm going to get a little thinner, lose some weight in addition to increasing having the benefit of this training is to lose this weight. And that's a very, very slippery slope to go down. So basically what it says, relative energy deficiency, is that your nutrient imbalance that you have, so you're taking in fewer calories than what you're expending, it actually leads to decreased performance. So what we think is going to be beneficial actually doesn't help us at all, and it can be pretty dangerous. So we're going to touch on that a little bit, on what that can lead to. But really it starts kind of innocent. It starts as a way to get faster and better, and you think, okay, yeah, I'm going to be able to get thinner so that I can actually have less weight to carry and I can go faster. But again, that's not going to really help in the long run. It results in injury, slower times, fatigue. So you really don't see that benefit because that's not where your body needs to be. Your body weight, you might be pushing down lower than what it should be. And then also your body's just not getting the calories it needs. And so when it's not getting the calories, it's not getting the fuel, and then it can't do the job that you want it to do. So if you are a coach, especially for high school athletes and college as well, it's so common. So it might go unnoticed, but know that you likely have an athlete that is actually kind of being affected by the REDS. So 78% of female athletes meet the criteria, and even 65% of non-athletes. So it doesn't mean that you have to be an athlete. Even non-athletes can have some of these symptoms and actually be affected by this. So it's pretty common. And I think it's important to know that everybody can be at risk, even though we often think about it for runners or dancers or gymnastics, any of those where a lean physique is really desired. Any sport, any even soccer or anything like that you can be at risk for this. So I'm going to try to show a quick clip. But I don't know if you've heard of Mary Cain, but she is a great runner. She was on track to become one of the best female athletes and joined the Nike Oregon Project when she was 18. And then I think it was last November or late fall, kind of broke in the news. She left the Nike Oregon Project and it kind of blew up on what was actually going on. A lot of hidden things were happening there. They had an all-male staff that told her that she needed to keep losing weight to get better. So during that time, she actually lost her period for 3 years and then broke 5 different bones. And I haven't gone into the symptoms, but those are some symptoms of what happens when you are having the female athlete triad. So I am going to stop sharing this and going to try doing the video. I'm not going to show this whole video, but I do encourage you to take a look. It's from the New York Times. It's a pretty long one if you want to watch the whole thing. So it's actually really interesting to watch. Let's see. Actually, I don't know if I think I might not have been able to. So anyway, I just look up, I was the fastest girl in America until I joined Nike. It's a New York Times opinion. I don't know if I can get the sound to work actually on my computer right now. So take a look at that. And she just really breaks down kind of the importance of what you should be aware of. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint for you. All right, so, but just keep in mind that it can happen to anybody, even when you are one of these top athletes, or if you're just an average athlete, or even just starting out, anybody can be really affected by this. Okay, so what is it exactly? It's obviously three components that make up the triad. That's why it's called a triad. And it's important to know that you don't have to have all 3 of these exhibited to be at risk. So you can still be at risk even if you have just 1 or 2, or some of them you might not even be aware of, because one of them is low bone mineral density. So if you don't get this checked out, you probably don't even know if you do have that. But the other ones are maybe a little bit easier to distinguish: low energy availability and then menstrual dysfunction. So I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail for you. So the first one is probably the most common that you think of, because that's in the name of REDS, is the low energy availability. And so simply, like I said, you have more calories going out than you have coming in. And this can be with or without disordered eating. Like I said, you could just not have the appetite to drive the adequate consumption. So that's why I really encourage, even when you get done running and you might not be hungry, to go ahead and eat something, because your body needs it for recovery, for fuel, but you might not actually have that appetite right away. But it is really important to get that in pretty soon after you get done with your run, and just make sure that you are getting enough energy throughout your diet. But you could also have some degree of disordered eating. And that's just some unhealthy thoughts about food. And it's not necessarily eating disorder. I think everybody can have some level of disordered eating. And it's just important to be aware of what that looks like. So kind of think to yourself, have you ever not ate when you were hungry? Maybe only eating like quote unquote the right foods when training, because these are the foods you need to be eating. Avoiding going out with others to avoid those unfamiliar foods that doesn't fit into the foods that you're allowing yourself to eat. Maybe you're bringing your own food to events to have more control. So you don't want to have the unknown of what's going to be available. You bring your own food. And this is disregarding allergies or anything like that. And then if you're running extra, if you happen to eat more than normal, or maybe you missed a workout and so the next day you're working out more to compensate for that missed day that you didn't run, those are all signs, just to kind of red flags, I guess. So kind of think to yourself, have you ever had those thoughts before? Are they reoccurring thoughts? And that might be a sign of, hey, there's some things going on that we should look at. So component number 2 is the menstrual dysfunction. So that's just meaning that you're not having your monthly periods or you're having really long cycles. And again, you can still have the syndrome, REDS, even if you have your periods. So just keep that in mind. Don't say that, oh, I still get my period monthly, so I'm okay. But it could actually, especially if you're on birth control, it looks like you're having your period and it's kind of a disguise. You don't actually know how your body's actually doing. Because with those persistent low energy availability, that you're not getting enough energy in, that affects our hormone levels that regulate the menstrual cycles. And so that's what's happening. It's all hormone based. And then the last component is the low bone mineral density. Again, those altered hormone levels, it just plays a role in everything. It also leads to that low bone mineral density, or BMD. And just keep in mind that your bone mineral density accumulates primarily during childhood and adolescence. So if you are a coach, again, it's really important that you're just making sure that they're eating enough and kind of fueling themselves correctly in order to keep building into that bone mineral density. Because after 25, 30 years, we stop I always call it a bank. So we're kind of adding all those nutrients into our bones for a bank. And then as we get older, then we have to draw from that bank. And if there's not enough to draw from, that's when osteoporosis and osteopenia can start coming in. And so we always are going to have a constant blood calcium level. And if we're not getting that calcium from our diet in order to make sure that our blood calcium is okay, then we're going to be drawing from our bone, which is kind of like that last resort. And if there's nothing in our bone, that can really cause some problems later on. So again, if you might not actually know what your bone mineral density is, but if you're noticing that maybe you're getting injured more, you're getting some stress fractures, that's a sign that you do have that low bone mineral density. All right, so signs to look for. This could be for you, for your teammate, a friend, your athlete. So just keeping these in mind, that it might not just be for you, but to really be aware, because a lot of these can go kind of unnoticed. So I think I already talked about this. I won't touch on it too much more, but that energy imbalance is really, you're not getting enough energy to go towards training and to function for your body. So your dietary energy expenditure or intake is minus whatever you expend in your exercise, should really then result in adequate energy for your remaining body functions. But in this case, you'd be in negative. So just keep in mind, again, it's a spectrum, but signs and symptoms. So weight loss is kind of like the main one that you might notice the most. Other eating disorder symptoms, like you're preoccupied with food, you're continuing to diet even though you have weight loss, all the brittle hair, sensitivity to cold, all those things. Fatigue or decrease in performance. You might have depression or low self-esteem when you're extreme exercise. So again, where it's so rigid and you have to get your workout in, and you're going long distances, you keep increasing the length that you're going. Those are all kinds of things when it looks like extreme exercise. And again, those stress fractures and then abnormal cycles. And I just really want to emphasize that it is a spectrum. And so I really liked this diagram where you have in the green, the optimal energy, but then it can go down to low energy is the most extreme, but you can just have reduced energy, or you can just have menstrual irregularity, or just low bone mineral density. So it's a spectrum. It doesn't mean that you have complete absence of your period or osteoporosis. So just keep in mind that we really want to catch this before it gets to the lower end of things. We want to be able to catch it sooner, and that makes it easier to kind of bounce back. Okay, so lastly, the prevent and treat. So our goal is really to restore the energy balance. Thankfully, if we can get back on track of that, it's easy to get those hormones back in place, and then we can start seeing everything resume back. Proper nutrition, again, is the key thing, I think, for the treating. Adjust your energy expenditure, and then making sure that you get, again, that adequate calcium and vitamin D for your bones. Increasing your calorie intake. A lot of times we think that losing a few pounds will improve that performance, but that usually doesn't equate out, especially if we're losing weight too quickly. And then often that weight gain is necessary to resume back everything else. And then just, again, keep in mind that if you're underfueled, then that's going to have a poor return on your training efforts. When we're hungry, we're actually in a catabolic state. So that just means that you're kind of in that breakdown state. But our bodies are going to train best, especially for strength and speed, when we're in that anabolic. So that's a building state. And I won't go into too much more of this, but again, if you're like, hey, this is me, but you just need help to be able to figure out the quality and the quantity of what you should be consuming and how to get back into that balanced energy location, or a kind of balanced energy intake, feel free to reach out. Again, that's something that I can go over more in detail, maybe one-on-one, based on your specific needs. So I'd love to talk more with you on that. And then this is for anybody. So it's not necessarily if you do have REDS, but it's just a sign to look out for. So if you are underfueled, you will probably have that breakthrough hunger in the early to middle part of your run. You're going to feel sluggish or easily frustrated during your run, which is the worst feeling, to kind of feel that like heaviness and that sluggish. I don't know, I always hate feeling that way. Or if the quality of your workouts decrease during the course of the week. So just keeping that in mind, if you're noticing those things, that's a sign that you're probably starting out your run underfueled, and there's some ways to kind of improve on that. And that's another thing that I can help with, kind of work through, of timing of meals and snacks, and just to make sure that you're fueling up properly before your training runs. So again, for prevent and to treat, you can reevaluate your training. So there's a side of, we want to increase the amount of calories that you're consuming, but we want to also reevaluate what your training looks like. So it may look like reducing it, or reducing the exercise length or the intensity as you improve your energy balance. It doesn't mean that it has to be that way forever, but in the meantime, in order to improve, we do need to kind of look at what your training looks like. And then go to professionals. So there's a lot of emotional sides to this too. So the depression, the low self-esteem, the eating disorder, those are all things that's harder to just, okay, I'm going to start eating more calories or eating more. Sometimes there's a little bit deeper kind of psychology into that. And so that's when it'd be great to see a therapist, a dietitian, talk to your doctor, talk to your coach. All of them can help you get in the right direction of where you need to go. Okay, so lastly, tips to prevent. So treating is one thing, but it's also a lot of these consequences of these conditions may not be completely reversible. So I think it's best to just know in advance of what this even is and how to prevent it. So again, just keeping track of your periods, just kind of being an eye on, okay, how long are they lasting? Am I skipping any months? And then just remember, it sounds simple, but sometimes it's not easy to do, is just don't skip those meals and snacks. So when you're hungry, go ahead and eat. So I think it's important to honor that hunger. And then it's also your body's way of telling you that it needs more energy. And so if we're avoiding it, say it's, oh, I just ate lunch, I shouldn't be hungry. Well, if you did a intense workout, your body is probably needing a little bit more than you would have if you hadn't. And so even if it feels like you're eating a lot, that's because your body just needs a lot right now. So keeping that in mind, that it doesn't always necessarily line up with what you think you should be eating. It might actually be more in being okay with that. Seeing a dietitian when you start to train, or see a physical therapist like Spencer, just to make sure that you are training properly, you're getting enough nutrients, you're not getting enough calories, just to be able to start out well. And it'll help you not get discouraged either. So if you can start out and your runs are going well from the very beginning, then that's a great thing, and you might not get as discouraged. And then just keep in mind too, to do it for you. I think a lot of times with sports, especially in high school, there's a lot of pressure from teammates and coaches and friends. And what started out as like a fun activity really turns into sometimes a miserable experience. I hate to say it, and we don't want that. And so if you're not enjoying your sport, then make a change too. And just know like what else is going on. Maybe there's other stressors in your life, and kind of reevaluating everything. But I know it's your body too, so you know more than anybody else how you're feeling. Goes back to Mary Kane. She knew what was going on, but her coaches just kept pushing her. And so if you're in that kind of environment, it's just important to talk to somebody and reach out, because you have to be an advocate for yourself too, and really know what's going on with what your body needs. So that sounds like that kind of ended it on a downer, but just keep in mind that it's great to just kind of be aware in general of what's going on, because you can't fix a problem if you don't know that it's even there. So I don't want to spend too much more time. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I have my Instagram there, but it's also, I'm on Facebook as well. So Kara Hair Nutrition, easy to find me. You can email me as well. And again, if you need nutrition coaching, use this code I have. It's RUN15. You get 15% off, and we can set up a discovery call just to figure out what plan or what thing would work best for you. But anyway, feel free to reach out with questions, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will pass it on to Spencer. And I do not know how to share the screen, but maybe if you could try, and then maybe we could turn you over to be the host.
Yeah, I just gotta, if you can send me the host, that'd be great. One comment off of that too, you're talking about disordered eating. And I actually had a coaching client recently who came to this realization that previously he was wanted, and now he realizes he needs to eat so that he can run. So it was a nice little mindset shift.
Yes.
Regards to that disordered eating, which is cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good realization to have. Remind me, how do I switch you over to be the host?
If you go to the list of participants, you should be able to click on something next to Spencer's name, and there's like a drop-down menu, and then there's an option.
Yep, perfect.
Host.
Got it.
Awesome. All right. Sweet. Let that load. Awesome. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Spencer Agnew. I'm a physical therapist and running coach here in Madison, founder and lead therapist of Peak Endurance Performance and Physical Therapy. So initially I wanted to kind of bring out my bias, tell you my experiences, what I do, because some of what I'm going to talk about is based on my experiences. A lot of it is based on the research. So I'm a physical therapist. I'm biased to exercise and strength training. So we're going to talk about exercise and strength training. In my coaching experience, I've coached collegiately, high school athletes, adults ranging from different spectrums of experience, people just starting, people who've been running for 30 years, and post-collegiate athletes right after they've competed at the collegiate level. So the nice thing is I've had a wide spectrum of ability levels and experience levels in the sport, which has helped me learn a lot about how to work with athletes, and I'm continuing to learn that day in and day out. So general overview with running. So our goals with running are to generate force and to mitigate fatigue. We're trying to impose more force into the ground to help us move forward and push off how tired we get as long as possible. So the nice thing is that these are the same goals I use for strength training. I'm just trying to help athletes generate force and help athletes mitigate fatigue. So force is kind of an absolute value. It's how much energy you can impose into the ground. Power is what we're actually looking for. So we're trying to take that force and generate it quickly. Because with running, generally, we're trying to move faster and faster, train our bodies to move faster and faster. So we're trying to ideally generate power later on in the training cycle. Early on, more of the rehab process is generating force. With fatigue, this is an interesting one because there's so many different aspects of fatigue. And I feel like a lot of times we neglect some of these. So there's muscular fatigue, right? When our muscles get really tired, the cardiovascular fatigue, our ability to exchange oxygen and bring those nutrients to the tissue. Neurologic fatigue is one that we often neglect, and that's our body's ability. The nerves connect to the muscles and help them function, help them fire, and that system gets fatigued as well. High plyometrics, heavy racing can do that. People know the flailing posture people get at the end of an 800-meter run or 400. There's psychological fatigue, which we encounter every day in this sport, and metabolic fatigue. I'll touch a little bit on that. Kara did a great job already covering a lot of this. But the ability to utilize the energy sources that you have in your body. So these are the same goals for strength training. Strength training in general is just to supplement your running. I talk to people all the time that if running is our goal, running is priority number one. Our goal with strength training is to help foster your running, to allow you to continue running, to perform better if that's your goal, but to stay healthy and maintain the ability that you've got. So the question today is how are these things modified with the female athlete? So I'm going to go through each aspect of fatigue and kind of talk about the differences between males and females, and then talk about some hormonal differences, and then what does it matter? Why does it? How do we implement this in practice? So from a muscular standpoint, in general, men have more muscle mass than women. Obviously, these are generalizations. There's a spectrum, but we're going to use the average to kind of give us an idea of how things function within the athletes and the group of people that we're working with. So more muscle mass with men. Women have more type 1 or slow twitch fibers. Men have more fast twitch fibers on average. This increased muscle mass and this increased fast twitch fiber allows men to generate force at a faster rate, but they fatigue more quickly, right? So these muscle fibers fatigue quicker than slow twitch, and there's more of them, so there's more of an energy expenditure. So women in general have a lower rate of fatigue, but they also generate less force in general. And there are hormones that are said to modify these. So why is it different in men and women with these muscle fiber types? In general, it's the hormonal changes in our bodies that help dictate some of these gene expressions. And today is going to be a little sciencey. So stick with me for a little bit. It'll get better, but we'll start pretty sciencey. So from the cardiovascular standpoint, our ability to transport oxygen and nutrients to the tissue to move blood. VO2 is a big topic that people love to hold on to. How are we working on your VO2 max? How high is your VO2 max? In general, men have a higher VO2 max than women. Larger muscle mass requires this, larger body sizes, but our heart rate on average is pretty equal. So there's not a significant difference between men and women for their resting heart rate, maximum heart rates, but men's stroke volume is larger. So from a physiological standpoint, they have a bigger heart. You can say maybe not with compassion or anything like that, but they can generate more force and they can move more blood with one pump of the heart. And this leads to a greater cardiac output. So they can push more blood through the system, but they have more lean muscle mass. So from the female side of things, if you took a consistent muscle mass or take a consistent volume over that muscle mass, then women are going to be able to transport oxygen and distribute that oxygen greater because there's less surface area to move. So from that nerve standpoint, this is pretty sciencey. The nice thing is there's not a lot of research that shows that there's a big difference between men and women, but they used the study that I am keying on is use the central activation ratio. So the central activation is basically our brain and our spinal cord releasing different neurons to the muscle tissues and how much central fatigue there is from that nervous system. They found in the study that there's no real difference between men and women, and that most of the fatigue is due to the muscle mass changes. So that because women have less muscle mass and different muscle fiber types, then they don't fatigue as quickly. It wasn't due to the neurologic changes. There are some hormonal changes that can cause changes to the nervous system, but in general, the nervous system, both sides function similarly, which is really nice for whether you're a coach or a healthcare professional working with these athletes. The psychological aspect, I'm going to talk about this with regards to strength training, and this is a pretty big generalization, but based off of things that I've seen with working with athletes, but also been questioned with clients. And there's a big fear with weight gain, especially when we're working with runners We're looking for performance gains, and people know in general, the lighter frame I am, but still being able to produce force, I can move it a lot more quickly. So people are always fearful of lifting weights because they're afraid to put on muscle mass. And I like to tell people that gaining weight is really, really hard. Go talk to your friends who are trying to bulk up, or people doing bodybuilding, and ask them how easy it is to do. They spend hours and hours and hours in the weight room, and they eat more than you can imagine. So that anabolic system of building that muscle mass is really, really challenging. And then from a running standpoint, it's at odds with the catabolic standpoint, that breakdown that we do day to day with our running. So there's this balance that Kara's talked about, where we have this breakdown, but we've got to build it up enough to be able to maintain. And in general, endurance athletes work out and run too much that they need more calories and more going into the system than they think they do to be able to maintain. If you want to put on a lot of muscle mass, generally people are decreasing their aerobic activity, increasing their resistance training, and eating a lot. So the fear of the weight gain is just a conversation we've got to have. It builds into that acceptance and that environment in the weight room. People are afraid a lot of times to get under the barbell, to move heavy weights, because they've heard these stereotypes of gaining weight. Their image and idea of the weight room is like what would happen with the football team going in there and lifting. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but with the running culture and the running community, it's a little different. And just the educational process, I think from a coaching standpoint and healthcare practitioner standpoint, that strength training and lifting for the female athlete is extremely important. And Kara had mentioned the bone mineral density. A great way to increase your bone mineral density is through strength training. And doing that at an early age to help build up that bone bank is really, really valuable. So if we can't address these psychological changes and these generalizations that we have with the weight room, we're doing our athletes a disservice. So this is something I'm really, really passionate about, trying to help create a good environment in the weight room with your female athletes, to help make them feel comfortable and help get them motivated and excited to do strength training. So a little bit on the metabolic fatigue, metabolic differences in men and women. Kara already talked about the relative energy deficit in sport syndrome. So the way that I think about it from not a nutritionist standpoint is that we have a finite amount of energy stores that we can utilize throughout the day. And I tell people all the time that stress is stress. So your body's response to running from a bear and running a race is pretty similar. We have this increase in adrenaline, these cortisol levels that change, and your body can't differentiate between those two things. So that stress goes to the top of the list. That's priority number one. Your body is going to fuel your muscles to do this activity and take that energy away from other systems in the body. And we know through research and through feeling that digestion generally will go down during running. All of the nutrients, the blood flow will go to the extremities to help you accomplish the task that you have at hand. So this puts your training priority number one from a metabolic standpoint. And there are other systems that need to be addressed. And the big thing with the big difference between the female athlete and male athlete is the menstrual cycle. And that's a metabolic demand on the body. And if there's not enough of that energy storage there, then that's something that kind of goes to the wayside, which is what Kara has talked about. Relative energy deficit syndrome is not only exclusive in women, it's in men too, but a lot of times it gets associated more with women because of that added energy expenditure of the menstrual cycle. So I like to think about the analogy of running and the metabolic function like cooking eggs. So basically to cook eggs, you want to turn the burner on low and slow and cook the eggs really gradually over time. It gives you a lot more control over what kind of egg you want, if you want it hard or easy or whatever, and it gives you the kind of that perfect egg. If you turn the burner up really high and you start burning the system with a lot of training, not doing the fueling like you're supposed to, then you have a very finite window of time where those eggs are going to be cooked right. So that's where a lot of people will get to, where they've kind of got into this REDS and they're running really well, but then eventually they're going to burn those eggs, and eventually the system is going to get into overdrive and you're going to start having injury issues, and you get stuck in the cycle of stress fractures and women losing their menstrual cycle. So we talk to athletes that you may be running PRs, but are you healthy? And as healthcare practitioners, coaches, athletes, our number one goal is to have a healthy individual. We want to be lifelong athletes, but we want to be lifelong healthy individuals more so. And if we are running PRs, that's great. We can still run PRs with a healthy body. So focusing on this, I think, is really, really important for coaches and practitioners. Another way to look at this from a metabolic standpoint and stress is the acute to chronic workload ratio. And this is a newer thing that's been coming out, getting a lot of popularity. But I'm actually working on a project right now to help distribute a way to do this for individuals so that I can do this with my athletes and my clients and kind of collect some data. But to calculate this ratio, you basically take the last 7 days, the average of the last 7 days of an individual's training cycle. You look at how many minutes they ran, walked, cross-trained, whatever, and how hard it was. And you take those minutes as workload units, average over the last 7 days divided by the average over the last 28 days. And we're looking for a 0.8 to 1.3 ratio. So basically this tells us that we want to keep training fairly consistent in this narrow window. We don't want to train too much because then we're going to cause injury. We don't want to train too little because then we're going to cause injury there as well. But the injury risks increase on both sides of that spectrum. We want to maintain it in this healthy range. We've got to allow for an increase in workload because that's how we get better. We overload the system. We're working harder and longer, which is okay. But the nice thing about this ratio is it's not just the miles you run a week or the minutes you run a week. It takes into account your RPE, which is your rate of perceived exertion. How are you perceiving that exercise? And that takes into account your work stress, your school stress, your sleep, your nutrition, and all these other factors, relationships, family situations, all these other factors, economic situations like right now, that play a role in your perception of how hard you're working. So we get a better, well-rounded picture on your training instead of just saying, yeah, I ran 60 miles this week. Like, I must be doing good. So if we can broaden the horizon on that, we can get a better image on how to modify training so that we can make sure that we stay in a good metabolic situation and try to prevent some of these syndromes and REDS from occurring. So away from that, women generally more readily store fat and are more efficient at utilizing it with exercise. So this again leads us to that endurance and that kind of hyper endurance situation where women are just more apt and able to utilize the energy stores that we need for some of those longer distances. Goes along with their fiber typing and their decreased risk or decreased ability to fatigue. So the big things, the hormone changes. So let's go to the image first. So menstrual cycle, this is looking at hormone changes. And early on in the cycle, there's a lower level of hormones. This is where they're more similar to men, I guess you can say. Obviously not the same, but the hormones relatively are lower. As you get into, this is in the follicle phase, as you get into the luteal phase, then those hormones start to increase. And this is where we're more interested and more worried about performance changes because of this increase in hormone. So with an increase in estrogen, progesterone, which happens in that later luteal phase, we have a higher energy expenditure. So we are predisposed to more of this central nervous fatigue, which means exercises feel harder. And we as female athletes, not me, I'm sorry. There's also an increase in resting heart rate, which means that there is a smaller gap to go from your resting heart rate to your exercise-induced heart rate, especially if you train with heart rate zones. This can kind of mess things up and throw off those zones. So you're quicker to fatigue. There's retention of fluids, which could potentially decrease blood plasma and your ability to transport oxygen. And then we know that there's this elevated blood temperature, or body temperature, sorry, because of the energy expenditure and potential for an increased cardiovascular strain. So this is really important, especially early on in the cross-country season in these hot and humid conditions. Knowing that there's this is kind of get exacerbated with just the weather and the environment that we're in. This is probably the first thing that we go to as coaches over the relative energy deficit disorder or syndrome with female athletes. And it's hard for me as a male athlete. A lot of females don't feel comfortable talking to me about this. I'm lucky enough to have my wife as a coach, so she's an easy person that they can go to, and my wife and I will have a conversation. We'll talk about it, and she's out talking to the athletes, which is awesome. But knowing that potentially a female athlete is running really, really well, workouts are going great, races are going great, and then at the high school level, we don't modify our training based off of menstrual cycle or generally the racing schedule. At the professional level, people can obviously modify that to a certain extent, but if things are going really well, and then all of a sudden there's this off week of training where people are feeling flat or feeling like they have less energy or not hitting workouts or races, sometimes the athlete will perceive it as I'm not doing enough or my training is wrong or something is going on. And we've got to be there to remind them that if this is the cause of it, that your changes are not fitness related, that we do not need to decrease your food consumption, increase your training, do all these modifications for that week when it's a hormone change. And it's more about dealing and learning how to modify training from a coaching perspective. It's your responsibility to be able to do that. Have a conversation with your athletes and encourage them and let them know that they're not performing at a lower level than they want to, than the desired level because of fitness. So this is really, really important, and something that I feel like a lot of times we don't talk about and don't communicate to our athletes because it can be an uncomfortable situation, especially as a male practitioner and a male coach. It's a challenging conversation to start. I think once you start it, things can go really, really well. But having a female coach to go to or a female parent that you can communicate with is really valuable. So biomechanics. You guys, yeah. This is the one that a lot of people go to and think about. So in general, female athletes, sorry, I'm trying to move this out of the way. Females have a higher Q angle. So if you take the line from the hip to the knee, this angle is greater in female athletes than male athletes, which you'll see in the running video, can potentially put increased strain on the knee and at the foot. So we can get this dynamic knee valgus where the knee comes in, we can get excessive pronation at the foot. One thing that we do from a strength perspective is focusing on hip training, hip strengthening to help keep this pelvis level, and quad strengthening to help control the body's ability to transfer that load over the foot when they're running, when they're in the gait cycle. This is also related to what's called a crossover gait, which both women and men do, but women are more susceptible to it, and both men and women are more susceptible to it with increased speeds. So if I played this, and you watch this athlete run, if you go to midline, you can see how they're crossing their foot on that line, and you can also see the gap between the knees and how it's open and close and open and close. So that's that knee kind of coming in and crossing midline, and that can put more stress on tissues on the outside of the leg if the body's not strong enough and ready to tolerate those tissues. So that's where strength training is really important, because we can build that tissue capacity for the female athletes so that even if we can't completely modify their gait, which I'm not a huge component of changing gait unless we necessarily have to, we can give them the capacity and kind of the body armor and resiliency to tolerate those loads over and over and over again through the gait cycle. So some of the exercises that we like to do this. Step up variations. A recent study just came out talking about what's the best exercises for this glute contraction, for these glute strengthening, and step ups were the top 4 exercises. A standard step up, which I'll show you in the next slide, a side step up, a crossover, and a diagonal are really good strengthening exercises for female athletes, male athletes as well, but with this increased risk for this dynamic knee valgus, it's really valuable for the female athlete. Any single leg exercises are good because running is a single leg activity. So we want to put you in that to help gain control and eccentric strength over that limb. And then building a robust and resilient individual from a strength perspective is really valuable from the double leg compound lifts. So doing squats, doing deadlifts, and loading those deadlifts and squats is really, really valuable for the female athlete. So here are the videos. So this is a step up. Watch this. See if this load should. So with a step up, you just are using a box or some sort of stair. Here's the same thing, loading issues. And let's see if this will work. I'm going to post these slides too, so you'll have access to it. You can watch them yourself. But basically, you're just stepping up onto the step, raising up. I go to a high knee position when I'm doing it. You can see, so on the box, up and down. I like to cue people to raise the bottom foot that's on the ground, raise that heel up so that your toe is there. It helps shift the weight onto the front foot so you can get a little bit more strengthening through that front limb. I'm not going to show this one, but this is a step down exercise, which is a different variation of a step up. Take a look at that one. I think it's really, really important from that control standpoint. All you need is a step, a couch, and ottoman, something easy that you can do that exercise on. So how do these things modify and affect me as a clinician and as a coach? So the biggest thing with the female athlete is dosing. We need to dose appropriately. Whether we're changing training due to the menstrual cycle and how the athlete's feeling, due to their relative energy levels, modifying those things so that we can keep them as a healthy individual, but also due to their fatigue and their decreased ability to produce force in general compared to the male athletes. So training for female and male athletes should not be the same. The female athlete may need more repetition or modification of weight percentage to reach fatigue compared to their male counterparts, just because they don't fatigue as quickly. So for me, what I do is I inquire a lot about how challenging was it from a fatigue standpoint, and what was your rate of perceived exertion? And we modify and find a desired stimulus based off of those subjective values. It takes some time to kind of get a handle on this because each athlete's different. As we know, those averages are a range. So some female athletes can have more slow twitch, more fast twitch, and we kind of got to figure out for the athlete what's best from a loading perspective. And then in general, like I mentioned, inquiring on the metabolic changes and the fatigue levels that a female athlete has as things change throughout the month. Be cognizant of those, know that it's appropriate and necessary to modify training because of those things. So what? The big kind of takeaways for you guys is that most of the differences are due to body types. Biomechanics, muscle fiber types, and hormones are the big differences between the male and female athlete. Female athletes better utilize fat stores during exercise, more endurance focused from the physiological standpoint of slow twitch fibers and decreased fatigue. Glute strengthening control is really important to help prevent that knee from coming in due to the wider set hips compared to a male, just the biomechanical differences. And then a question I get is, do we work on the strengths or the weaknesses? So when we're doing strength training, I think there's a time and a place for both. But in general, I focus on building their strengths, especially if they're new to strength training. I want to give them confidence and give them comfort in the weight room doing the exercises. So we build the strengths, continue to gradually increase those weaknesses as we're doing the strength training as well. So this is kind of the difference in my philosophy of training. Most people think of it as a pyramid, right? We build that base, summertime, start building strength, beating across, speed, and then we peak for conference section or state meet. I like thinking of it more as this soundboard. There are all these different aspects of training to focus on. There's your cardiovascular, just kind of your long, easy runs, aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, critical velocity threshold, anaerobic power, like a bunch of different things that you can work on. And over the course of the year and the season, we just modify how intense or how intentional we are on working all those things. So increasing strength can be something that's done all year long, but it's done at a different intensity. So I like, instead of the pyramid, this matches the pyramid, but I like thinking about it as more of these different levers that we're kind of adjusting how frequently and how intense we're working on all aspects of their training cycle, running and strength training. Questions? You can reach out to me any of these locations. I'll post this. These are my references if you're interested in reading some nerdy research. But I'll post these so that you guys have them for reference. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to Kara.
Awesome. Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, Kara, for those. Looks like we don't have any questions in the chat, but obviously questions arise later too. So like our two guests said, if you do come up with any questions, shoot them an email, message them. I'm sure their contact information can be found on their respective websites. But yeah, cool. Any last words from y'all?
No, I don't have any, but thanks for listening. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I know Spencer is obviously really capable of, has a wealth of knowledge, and same here. So we're both probably great sources to answer whatever questions you have.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Hope you guys will learn something. And Kara and I, we love this stuff, super passionate about it. So any questions, any comments you guys have, this just sparks conversation. Shoot us a message, contact us, and we're excited to continue this conversation.
And I'll be posting the recording on the YouTube page like normal, and I'll post the recording also in the Facebook event, just like I have been.
Cool. All
right. Well, thanks again, y'all, for enlightening us all. Yeah, good discussion, good information.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good morning, y'all.
Bye.
Yeah.